To say a few words to all of those out there watching and listening. Paige?
Hi, everyone. How are you? Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. We are so excited to have you here. I just want to send a sincere note of appreciation and thankfulness for your patience. And we have the most beautiful ballpark, and we look forward to hosting you all here as soon as we possibly can. So once again, thank you, and take it away, Matt and JD.
General Jon. Jon, good afternoon to you.
Hey, Matt. Let me get my video started there. How's it going, man?
Going. How are you?
I'm good. I hope you don't mind. I dressed up. I put on my best Rangers sweatshirt for you, and I'm sitting here in my guest bedroom.
You look relaxed.
Yeah. Been in the office last few days. Took today to work from home. So, but I'm happy to join you, and I appreciate all of our season ticket holders on there with us.
Because everybody is just learning how to go day by day, trying to figure out how to handle just on a daily basis, how to handle the situation that we're all in. And it's been a daunting task, I think, for everybody, and especially in a situation like this where normally we'd be 30 or so games into the season and you're still contemplating just exactly what needs to be done for the season to get started.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. You know, much like everybody, that the first few weeks we were back from spring training was kind of a transition, right? It was everybody settling in. How's the work from home thing going to work? You know, helping your kids, the homeschooling, where are you going to get your toilet paper, right? All the things we're all trying to figure out. And then I think once everybody got comfortable, we hit a pretty good stride of being productive, both from the employee staff standpoint and what we could do to generate content and value, and then keeping the players in some semblance of readiness. And now I think we've moved into a stage where we obviously don't have all the details yet, but we're a little bit more in a stage of getting back to baseball. So we're preparing for the draft, and obviously we're making sure that we're operationally and logistically ready for when MLB gives us the green light.
Okay. We're going to move to questions that season ticket members have provided in advance. And we've got about a dozen or so questions. I don't know if we'll have a chance to get to all of them here in this half hour that's been allotted, but we'll see what we can knock out. And JD, since you mentioned the draft, I'm going to start with a draft question. And that is from Zachary Z. He would like to know if you can elaborate on the thought process behind the new draft and how it affects how you will go about building a roster.
Yeah, so I think that the thought process behind the draft was from the league ownership and player association standpoint was really much like everything right now. It's just trying to simplify things to some degree, with a lot of unknown as far as, you know, what we're going to be able to do in the minor leagues, what college baseball is going to look like. You know, the spring has obviously been wildly disrupted, but you want to keep things going. So I think the decision was to reduce the number of rounds in the draft to where the top talent still has an opportunity to enter professional baseball. And, you know, we need that pipeline of talent Obviously, it's our future. But at the same point, to reduce the rounds from a logistical standpoint, you got to get all these guys physical, get them signed. That's a bit of a challenge right now. And also from a financial standpoint, from the realities where we're at. As far as what we're doing to put our board together, I mean, it's unique for a lot of reasons. I happen to think that the boards are going to look more different from team to team than they typically do, because you only have a month or so of baseball in a lot of areas. So you have a lot less performance, a lot less, statistical information that feeds a lot of how we make decisions these days. And because of that, you're going to be relying a lot more on the past and a lot more on your scouts' intuition and some of it's kind of fun in a lot of regards from that standpoint. So I'm looking forward to it. My guess is that, teams will be somewhat risk averse, and that could open up some opportunities.
Hey, when you think about it, at this time of the year, especially as we travel throughout Major League Baseball, it's this time of the year where you start to see a lot more scouts. But then when you're talking about the evaluation of amateur players, there aren't any games of any kind being played. So you don't have scouts anywhere really seeing anybody right now. And all the information that you have is information that was gathered prior to the last couple of months.
100%. So, just like everything else, as we hit March, different municipalities, different areas, different, conferences and high school associations started to shut down slowly. And then it obviously got to the middle of the month and it was, like we all experienced, you snap your fingers and everything was done. And so, yeah, it created a lot of challenges. But I think it creates some real opportunities. I think there are some organizations that have moved away from scouting to a pretty significant degree, and that I think creates some real challenges where, to get away from the human element, but which we have not done. We've tried to balance both sides, and I believe that's going to pay dividends for us here because we have the relationships with the local coaches, the local, areas. Our scouts are well, not right now, but they were in homes. They've developed relationships they've been able to maintain. We've been doing these kind of Zoom calls with players and their families and their high school coaches and college coaches to where I think that those relationships will pay dividends for us.
All right. Our next question comes from Dennis S. And Dennis wants to know if the season begins in the early part of the summer, I suppose in July, as we're reading now about the proposal, what precautions are being considered to ensure the health and safety of the players and any of the support and auxiliary staff and employees?
That's a great question, Dennis. I think it's probably the question, right? I think anything we do has to prioritize that piece of it. Obviously, there are other major topics, finances being the other one. I personally am confident that can be worked through if we can address the health and safety satisfactorily. And your point is spot on. It's the players, but it's a much broader group, right? It's everybody at every club, the hotels that we would have to stay at, the bus drivers, the visiting clubhouse employees, the folks that would have to come in to test the players and the staff. So I do feel really confident that MLB is working through that. They distributed some information earlier this week with a kind of a preliminary outline of some of the major areas that they would hit on, from testing to protocols. They are preparing a much longer, more specific, detailed document that will go out here soon that they're working on with the Players Association. We've also had a chance to work with and be on some multi-sport conferences with NFL, NBA, NHL, European soccer, cycling, a bunch of different type of sports where we've shared best practices. Saw a document the other day, the German soccer league and what they're doing. So I think there's a lot of smart people working on it, and we're just trying to pull all the best practices together and make sure that we protect the group as best we possibly can.
It seems like that everybody that's involved in this, there's a yearning to want to be safe and to do things the right way. At the same time, there's a yearning to get back onto the field. And you've got a lot of very intelligent people that are trying to decide just exactly how this possibly could work. There's so many factors that are involved that it's really mind-boggling when you think about it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Matt. It's the scope of it. What has to be taken in consideration is huge. And I know, Rob Matwick and his group. You'll hear from Rob a little bit. I know they've done a ton from the operation standpoint at the ballpark, which is a huge piece of it. And they're just your first point nailed it. Is like there's so much desire for us to play and incentive for everybody involved that I just believe that if it's possible, we'll figure it out. There are too many reasons to do it, and we all want it. I also think that part of the reason that we're getting the support we're getting is because of the major team sports. We are the sport that probably has the least physical contact, the least. There's not zero, right? I mean, a first baseman's going to hold a runner on. You're in close proximity to each other. The catcher, the umpire, the batter are close to each other, but for the most part, we're spread out in a big open area, and I think that models, behavior for the kids, a little bit better than, basketball. You can't help but be right up on top of each other, guarding each other. Football, obviously. So I think from a social distancing standpoint, from a kind of a government official standpoint, we're the sport that best models that.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move on here. Brendan M. would like to know, what is the process for identifying a player that could contribute to the team outside of simply looking at the on-field stats?
Yeah. So kind of answer that two ways. Like first in general, and then second for putting together our restart roster that we'll have to play with. I think in general, we put a huge place a huge value on the human being, on we'll call it makeup, grit, determination, perseverance, ability to overcome adversity, a lot of the same things that we would all want in an employee or a team member. Versatility, an ability to handle different roles, whether it's a reliever or a position player that can move around the diamond. I think that really allows you to expand your roster, and certainly durability. I think those are some of the major factors. I think the versatility and the durability come into play even more so when we're putting together our roster for, right now it's not set in stone, but there's speculation that we could have a 50-man roster that we could then pull from an active roster and a bit of a taxi squad. And if you're limited, the ability to guys that are often banged up or injured, that could really limit you in what you can do during the season. So we're paying even more attention to the versatility and the durability elements, putting together our restart roster.
Following up from that, as I think about it, when you talk about the possibility of a taxi squad and a roster size of 50, you've got the 40-man roster. So if you're going to go beyond that, you'd have to, make some decisions there. But it's looking more and more like if there is a start to the major league season, that there might not be a minor league season. How much of a setback would that be for all of the major league clubs if indeed none of the minor leaguers are out on the field playing this year?
Yeah, it's very real. So I think the minor leagues serve kind of two purposes. The biggest most important function is the development of the future of the game, right? These are our future stars, and you can't get better at something if you're not practicing it and honing your skills. So that really gets pulled into question, and I think there's a real keen understanding of that around the game. Everybody involved understands that nobody wants to see our best young talent take a year off. So we've been doing quite a bit of virtual player development remotely. I don't think that our guys are really taking the year off, but it's hard to replicate game reps. So my hope and belief is that there will be, public health permitting, there will be some sort of a development program for on a much smaller scale. It won't be 6 or 7 affiliates all playing across the country. I don't know that hasn't been set in stone, but I think there'll be some sort of a development program in place for for us to develop our guys. How that compares to a traditional minor league season remains to be seen. And then the second piece is it serves as your ability to replace players on your major league roster for injury or lack of performance. And I think that's where, this idea of a taxi squad or a shadow team, right? It's called different things, but that idea of 20 something players in reserve will come into play, and that you'll be able to make roster moves inside that pool of 50.
Okay, here's another question. This one comes from Eric C., and it's a little bit more specific. Eric wants to know, where is Willie Calhoun in terms of his recovery, and what will his role be if there are baseball games played starting in July?
Yeah, that's you start looking at silver linings, and that's probably one of them for us. It was an ugly deal when Willie got hit in the face that day. It was kind of crazy. That Sunday he gets hit in the face, and a week later, that was not even a story, because here we are breaking camp, and as the country's shutting down, we're headed home. Kind of forget about it. The good thing is he did not really suffer anything more than a broken jaw. Got incredibly lucky. No damage to his teeth. Thankfully, not to his eye. No, orbital bone or none of that stuff. No concussion. And after about 2 weeks, he was able to pick up some physical activity. He is now in full workouts. He's able to do cardio, weight training. He's been hitting. He's been throwing. He's been doing outfield drills. So, Willie is, as if it had never happened. He's ready to start whenever we get started, and he'll be our regular left fielder.
All right, let's move on. And this next question comes from Lance C. And Lance would like to know, what data-driven innovations, a la the opener shifts, do you expect to see become mainstream if we get to playing this year and beyond?
Well, I think one of the things that we might see, especially early on, is a less traditional pitching staff usage. Because I say that for a few reasons. The biggest one is just, we don't know. Everybody's in a different spot in terms of staying ready. Every pitcher's in a different spot. We haven't been able to monitor it nearly as closely as we could in a spring training setting. Now, we will have a several week training period to get ready, but it's somewhat of an unknown. I think teams are going to be relatively conservative with their pitching. We don't necessarily fall into that exact category, because we have veteran starting pitchers who I believe have a better feel for their own arms and keeping themselves ready in their bodies, and they know what it takes to get ready. But not every team is in that spot. And so I think teams will, with an expanded pitching staff, with the desire to avoid injuries and protect pitchers early on, I think you might see, whether it's the opener or more of a committee approach to getting through some games, at least until the starters have had a little more time to get fully built up.
When you mentioned about pitchers and different players and their different routines in trying to stay ready for the course of the season, I think earlier this week or within the last few days on social media, I believe it was Nick Goody who was pitching on a pier, yeah, and then took a leap into the water. Is that something that the Rangers are just giving a big thumbs up to as far as pitching preparation is concerned?
Yeah, that is a big part of our active program. You got to throw to your partner on the pier. I would hate to be his catcher if he skips one of those sliders on the wooden pier there. But that was pretty cool. He sprinted down and did a leap over him and a full flip into the water. Nick is, he sent in a few other videos that I don't think are quite social media friendly, but he's had fun with his training.
Well, and it's nice to see guys not only staying in shape, but having some fun and relating that to their followers as well. All right, here's a question from Alan W. And he would like to know, what do you think about Joey Gallo's comments that the new ballpark plays big? Joey made mention that he might like to see whatever you could do to move the fences in a few feet.
I always crack up because pitchers, the park's always small, and hitters, the park's always big. The park across the street, Globe Life Park, is statistically it was one of the top 2 or 3 hitters park in the game. To hear our hitters talk about it, they think that the last 5 or so years that it wasn't, that it played neutral. even though every statistical look at it, it did not. So it doesn't, that's kind of the mentality. I'm not real worried about Joey being able to hit one out. I think he may have the most power of anybody in the game, but maybe he's looking out for his teammates. But listen, it was part of our. It was intentional. It was intentional that we wanted to have a park that played a little more neutral. I think our goal was not to have it be an extreme hitters park or pitchers park. Now, some of it we don't know how it'll play. There are just so many unknowns when you're building it, and also still so many variables, right? I mean, I've been at some of those BP sessions, and we're not using brand new balls that we would use in a game, so they're a little different. The roof was closed that day. How does it play with the roof open? When the wind's blowing with humidity, how does it play with fans in the stands, live pitching versus, BP off Steve Buechele? So, there's a lot of variables, but if it doesn't play quite as hitter friendly, then Joey may not think so, but we will view that as a success.
Yeah, I don't think that Joey's average home run distances are in the ballpark of 380 or 390. Okay. There are very few Joey Gallo home runs that just made it over any outfield barrier. But you're right. Okay. I mean, I get asked that question all the time. How do you think the new ballpark will play? Number one, I've only been in the ballpark a couple of times, and until you actually start playing games and gathering data, you really don't know. And you might really need a full season before you have any kind of real read on what this ballpark will tend to be if it's not neutral.
I would think so. I would think so. And Rob and I were in some meetings early on with the architects, the engineers, and we had a consultant, an engineering company, talk us through some different options. But the reality, as far as from a testing standpoint, when it was in a modeling phase, and the reality is we could have done all the tests that we wanted, and there still wouldn't have been a clear answer. You're right, Matt. I think we'll know once we have a full season in there, or something to that degree, where we've seen how it plays with all the different elements that come into play, all the different variables.
Okay, moving on. Question from Cody C. Cody asks, are the Rangers concerned that a proposed regional-based schedule that puts them with West Coast teams exclusively is a disadvantage, and would Major League Baseball be doing anything to supplement the club's travel? I guess at what we've seen, that it's not set in stone, but the fact that if we do play sort of half a season, about an 80-game schedule, that the Rangers would be with the teams in the American League West, but also paired up against the teams in the National League West, which would mean, quite obviously, a lot of late-night games.
Yeah, I think Cody may have access to my texts to what I was talking to Ray Davis about, and also some folks at MLB. Yeah, that is a concern. Listen, ultimately, as long as we can be safe, we're going to do whatever we have to do to play, right? I mean, I think that inconvenience is not the issue. It's more an issue of health and safety, and we have to get our arms around the protocols and longer plane flights and more travel and those sort of things that I have some questions about. But also from our fan standpoint, late night games, starting at 9 o'clock, playing that many on the West Coast is not ideal. So I do, MLB is aware of that. I don't think that, one, they've committed to an exact setup or schedule. But two, that maybe there's a possibility that we could try to arrange to have some of those West Coast games start a little earlier for the benefit of our fans.
Okay. And JD, I'm being told we've got time for one more question. And so that honor will go to Mark Z. And Mark's question is, how do you decide to move a player to another position? Is it based on skill or need? And if so, do you go ask them, or do they usually, or do they, meaning the Rangers, do you usually approach the player first?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different factors, right? Some of which may be, hey, we have a player entrenched at a position, but we want to get your bat in the lineup. And typically, if it's a young player, I mean, they're not going to. So what are my options? Are playing my preferred position at AAA or playing another position in the big leagues? Like, that's usually a pretty easy answer. for them to do it. Sometimes we do it for need. Sometimes we'll do it because we think that the player's skills might translate better. One guy that's kind of interesting to me is Eli White. We moved him to center field kind of towards the end of last year. I actually think that it's going to help his bat. I think that there are times, and Joey Gallo is kind of similar, where you talk to Joey, he said that he doesn't have to think as much or stress as much or work as hard on his defense in the outfield. It comes more naturally to him. It frees him up, and I think that allows him to have more success at the plate than when he was really grinding mentally every working every day at third base or first base. And I think Eli White might be the same thing, where it just comes more naturally to him in center field. And I'm not saying he's going to be Adam Jones, but Adam Jones really struggled as a shortstop. Offensively, he struggled when he was a shortstop. He moved out to center field. He was really natural out there. And lo and behold, he's it was easier for him. Delano DeShields, struggled at second base, moved out to center field. It became easier for him. I think there are times when it's really in the player's best interest, almost mentally more than physically, to go somewhere where it's more natural and they don't have to use as much of their energy on that side of the game.
Very good. JD, thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful responses. We really appreciate it. I know the season ticket members appreciate it as well. And I hope that we get a chance to talk again real soon.
I look forward to it, Matt. Thanks for having me on, and thanks everybody for your support. Stay safe out there.
Okay. We'll transition from Jon Daniels now to our next guest. He's the Executive Vice President of Ballpark Operations for the Rangers, Rob Matwick. Rob, a hearty good afternoon to you.
Matt, how are you today? Glad to be with you.
Yep, I'm doing well. You are looking very energetic this afternoon.
Well, thank you. I'm upstairs. I know where you are downstairs in the conference room. I'm directly above you up here in my office. So glad to have you in the ballpark today.
Yeah, I've only had a chance to come out here on a couple of occasions, today being one of them. And everything on the outside looks great. It looks great on the inside. And I know that, you've poured your heart and soul into this project over the last couple of years. And so to have a ballpark ready to go and not be able to fill it with players and fans and people enjoying the sport of baseball has got to be very trying, I would think, in particular for you and a lot of people that have worked with you and a lot of people that have worked so very hard on this project.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. I appreciate you saying that. But to be clear, everybody in our organization, JD and his team, John Blake, I like to tell people everyone in the organization has had a hand in building this. Certainly Jack Hill, our project manager, has been phenomenal. And, it truly has been a labor of love because we're also passionate about the game. We're also passionate about wanting to get our fans into this building so they can cheer for the Rangers, but also to be able to do a number of other things with the flexibility that this building has. So it is a little sort of a little mind-boggling to think that we've not been able to do that. We certainly understand the circumstances that brought us to where we are, but we'll fight through it. We're going to take one day at a time, and hope the brighter days are going to be ahead. So we'll get through this. And when we can't welcome our guests, we look forward to it, and we know they're going to really enjoy being in this park.
Just a few moments ago, JD touched on the topic of how the ballpark might potentially play after comments about Joey Gallo saying we need to move the fences in a little bit. When it comes to design, and I know that you also had a hand previously when you were with Houston in the building of Minute Maid Park, and JD talked a little bit about wanting to try to strive for being a neutral park, not being a real hitter-friendly park or a pitcher-friendly park. How do you go about that? And was there a goal of making this as neutral a park as possible?
That was certainly the discussion. Our social media team had me muted while JD was responding to that. I was trying to figure out a way to chime in because he and I, this is a true story, he and I actually had a conversation after the team got back from spring training in mid-March where, he'd gone down, I think, and looked at the field. And literally he asked me one day, he said, do you think if we had to, could we move the fences back?
Okay.
So it was ironic to hear, it was just a question because we did shorten the power alley significantly, especially in left center. As you know, at Globe Life Park, it was 390 to left center plus a 16-foot high wall. So we wanted to try to make it fair for right-handed hitters, or at least, more fair than maybe Globe Life Park was. So, we brought that alley into, 374. So pretty significant, and an 8-foot fence out there. So that's a pretty significant advantage. And then same thing, the right field power alley at about 372. The lines, I think, are fair at 329, 326. And then center field is, we go out to, 410 out there, which, probably benefits the pitcher a little bit. But I thought it was interesting to hear what Joey had to say. And I think JD explained it very well about, facing Steve and using BP baseballs versus game balls, and, pitchers not throwing 95 and him hitting it out at 120 miles an hour. So a lot more research needs to be done, but it's interesting that JD and I actually had that brief email exchange, I think, a month and a half or so ago. He said, if we had to, would it be possible to move the fences back? So, a lot of flexibility, but, we need to play some games, that's for sure, and see how it plays. And obviously, I don't think anybody would complain if it benefited pitchers a little bit more. I know our pitchers wouldn't complain if it played true. And I think that's all you're really looking for. And then you just let the skill and talent of the players take over, which is the way it should be.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to some questions here from season ticket members. And Russell B is up with the first question, and he simply says, when can I tour the new ballpark?
Great question. We hope to begin tours, and I think the way we've been discussing it internally here is to offer it to season ticket members first. We're hoping to be able to do something in early June. Now that we have, and of course, with the circumstances we're in these days, we would have to probably limit the size of tours. We would have to, have our guests practice social distancing, perhaps wear masks. But we are targeting early June for start of tours. I don't have a specific date yet. Part of that is because we are now also juggling a number of graduation ceremonies that we'll be actually hosting in the ballpark. And a couple of the districts have already gone out with announcements that Globe Life Park will host those graduation ceremonies. So we're glad that we're going to be able to support the community in this role. As a dad who has a graduating high school senior this year, she won't be graduating Globe Life Field, but I'm very excited that she will actually be able to, participate in an in-person ceremony, which is really important to the kids. So we're excited to host those events. Part of that, in addition to the students, is that we will be hosting their families. So we are in the process now, and we've got about 2 weeks to finalize it before the first event. So we're actually putting in place and creating now a social distancing seating chart, which may not mean much to those not coming to the ceremonies, but I do believe it could be a precursor to socially distant seating for baseball, in my mind. So I've had some discussions with Major League Baseball. They're very interested in how we're approaching it for the graduations. We'll certainly share that information as we go forward. And my hope would be that, if as the circumstances as they are today continue, that we could still come up with a way to, to distance people in the ballpark and still be able to come and enjoy the games. So there's an underlying objective related to that. So hopefully it gives us a basis to begin.
Okay, and that was actually the next question from Nick N. So hopefully, Nick, that Rob just answered your question there. And Rob, we have that commonality. I also have a graduating senior, and just from the bottom of our hearts here with the Rangers, for anybody that has somebody that's graduating in the class of 2020, be it from high school or be it from college, and not being able to take part in all of the trappings that go along with the end of your time in school, it's really gut wrenching. And so we'll send our best wishes out to everybody that's in the class of 2020. And as it turns out, Rob, you had other events scheduled for the ballpark outside of baseball games. And so these particular graduation ceremonies are going to be the first.
Yep, they really will. And we've been thrilled with the amount of interest that we've had from a number of districts. Like I say, a few districts have gone public. I probably won't say who all of them are at this point, and maybe leave it to the districts to make those announcements, but I think it's slowly been filtering out. I believe at the moment, and this would be beginning May 29, and part of this has been working with JD and the baseball staff around hopefully what is, preparation for a season later in June. We've had to be very careful about how we schedule things, but currently we have more than 40 ceremonies planned for the ballpark. So the cooperation from the school districts has been fantastic. They're thrilled to have the opportunity to come into Globe Life Field. We're like I say, honored to have the kids and families and to be able to participate in this, milestone achievement for families. Like I say, as parents here, we can all relate that this is probably really the first significant milestone in a kid's life, graduating from high school. And since things like prom and, spring sports have been taken away from the kids, it's nice that we'll be able to offer an in-person ceremony at this great venue.
Okay, the next question, Rob, comes from Philip R., and he's asking a question that I'm sure is a question that a lot of people would like to hear an answer to, and it is, what will be the criteria for opening the roof of the ballpark on game days? And have there been any studies done on how the flight of the ball is impacted by closing the roof? So two-part question there from Philip.
Yeah, so I've been tracking it every day. And in the month, in March, April, if you will, our first month, we would have played 18 home games, and I had a 12 open, 6 closed. We would have just completed a series with Toronto this week. I had those all open, although I think maybe the Tuesday game we might have closed because, some of the variables we look at, temperature obviously, but for the first month here, and certainly this week, which I think we can all appreciate, the decisions would have been more weighted toward the threat of rain. So even though Tuesday evening turned out to be a great night at about 6 o'clock, and again, I'm guessing a little bit here. I'm thinking that most of these decisions are for a night game. The latest we can push is between probably 5:30 and 6, because your starting pitcher typically is going to begin his warm-up program between 6 and 6:15. So, the starter wants to know that, we got a green light to go forward. And with the roof, you're going to sit here and say, hey, there's no reason to not be able to start this game on time. So we want to make sure that we're always keeping our starters on schedule. That night in particular, we still had some clouds in the area, and looking at the weather service information that night, there was a very, very small chance of rain in that 6 to 7 o'clock hour. Probably would have erred on the side of caution just to make sure that we didn't impact our starters' routine to prepare for the game that night. So we might have played that one closed, although by 7 o'clock, by the time that we would have, 7:08 there, when we would have thrown first pitch, it was a beautiful evening, great night. Temperatures were very comfortable, and I think we could have played that game open. But, for the threshold, I think you're looking at probably above 85 degrees where we start to get concerned about it being too warm for fans. We want to mitigate some of those heat issues that we had at Globe Life Park. And then interestingly, on the bottom end, because we've had that question too, and interestingly, one of the first, I think it was the Houston weekend, we actually had a Saturday back in April where our high temperature was in the 40s. So we've also talked about a bottom where if it's below 65 degrees, because especially for a night game, if we're 65 at first pitch, you can assume that it's going to get down probably into the upper 50s by the end of the night, depending on length of game. So we've looked at both the top and the bottom. I think those are the thresholds we'll use. The only wild card and caveat I'd throw in there is that, and I really think we can do this here a lot with the synthetic surface, we can keep the roof closed during the day. So if we've got heat, even in the late afternoon, and keep the climate controlled, comfortable, don't allow the concrete to bake, and then go ahead and open the roof maybe at, 6:40, maybe 25, 30 minutes before game time, we go ahead and open it and then play a game open. One of our big challenges at Globe Life Park was always in the open air condition, that sun would just bake the seats, bake the concrete all day and hold that ambient heat. Now that we can mitigate that, we might be able to push the temperature threshold a little bit higher and play more games open, just because we can keep the concrete cool during the day and keep it comfortable for our players on the field.
And that, and the fact that you have that Shaw Sports turf surface gives you the flexibility to be able to make decisions like that, because in places like, Houston and Chase Field in Phoenix, before they went to that surface, they had to, you talked about making a determination around 5:30 or 6 for a 7 o'clock game. They would have to make that determination before 2, because it would take that long to get the air conditioning working to where by game time you were at whatever the target temperature is. And so that brings me to my next question. What is the target temperature? If we're playing a game with the roof closed, what can fans expect there for a target?
I think it's going to be in the mid 70s is what we're looking at. And obviously we can control temperature. And the other side of the coin, I talked about the low temperature scenario. We also have heat in the building, which I know not all of the other retractable roof venues do. I think I know in Houston, we did not. And when we designed it, we just didn't think that heat was going to be necessary, for the winter. So, but as we found here in our climate in North Texas, occasionally, and we've seen this toward the end of the year too sometimes, but like I say, we've already had a few days where temperatures are in the 40s and 50s, maybe have rain. So we can also provide heat in the building just to make sure that we maintain a consistent temperature, both for players and for our guests.
Okay, Rob, our next question comes from Mark Z, and it is, have you been inspired by any foreign ballpark designs? And if so, which?
Wow, that's an interesting question. To be perfectly honest, I think we've looked more domestically, unless you were include Toronto or Montreal as foreign. But when we studied and did diligence related to design, I think we primarily looked at domestic ballparks and things that were offered here in the United States and major league ballparks. Although there are great minor league ballparks too, and R&D, which we refer to internally as rip off and duplicate. So, we back as far back as 2011, I know there were a group of us on our executive team that traveled. We divided the country into thirds. There were 6 of us, 6 or 8 of us. We took sections of the country and visited different ballparks, arenas, just trying to borrow the best thinking from other venues and our partners in the business. And then, the architects, obviously HKS is a major international firm that has, is doing the stadium in Los Angeles, did AT&T Stadium here locally. They've done, Minnesota with the Vikings. They've done great stadium design. One or two of the other firms that we interviewed when we were in the process of looking for a master architect, those firms also have done extensive sports facility design. So, I do think we got the best of the best in terms of thinking. Some of it was inspired by what we saw from a team standpoint. Others, other part of it just inspired by what the architects felt like would be important, and you marry all those elements, and I think we've ended up with a great design.
Okay, Donald H provides.
I was going to say, I think I failed to just jumping back one step. So the person that asked a question prior about how the ball might play with the roof closed, which is an interesting question. I do think that when we talk to the people, JD had referred to a study we've done. There's a company in Toronto called RWBI. And they actually model and have wind tunnel testing capability there. So we've actually modeled the ballpark and tested it up in Toronto to try to see. The best thing, I think from a science standpoint, they'll tell you that there's probably less friction, in the air, because if you mitigate humidity, if you mitigate wind, there's less resistance for the ball. So in theory, it might fly more with the roof closed. But again, until we get it into practice, I'd like to see. And then we get that question about how's it going to play with it open? Well, fair question. But if you can tell me how the wind is going to blow from 1 minute to the next, I might be able to answer that. But none of us can answer that question. And what was interesting when we put the model, and we did this with Globe Life Park too, because we tested it several times, and they had that model for more than 20 years up there in Toronto. So we kept using that. But what happens to the wind moves at different speeds at different elevations. Sure, that from flying. As you go into the air, you hit different wind speeds, and typically closer to the earth, the speeds, vary or are more intense than when you're much higher above the earth. So you might have the wind moving at one speed, one direction at 10 feet above the field and be completely different at 40 and totally different at 140. And our games played at all those elevations, depending on flight of the ball. So anyway, I apologize. I didn't sort of touch on that question, but it is an interesting question. It's one that we're just going to have to get in and study as we play it. Wind direction, wind speed, it's constantly changing. So it's a hard variable to try to pin down to just say this is absolutely how it will play. But we do know with the roof closed that we will be able to mitigate the wind. And with air conditioning, we should be able to mitigate humidity. So I would think generally with roof closed, you're going to get a pretty true indicator of a fair and true game.
There you go. As you're talking about that, it reminds me of games at Globe Life Park where you could watch the flags. The flags that were perched near the top of the ballpark would be blowing one way, and then if you had the ceremonies prior to the game with the national anthem, and you had flags down on the field, and they would be pointed 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So the wind on the field was completely different from the wind maybe 50, 60, 70 feet above the playing surface.
Yeah, we would always pay attention to when home run fireworks would go off, because then you could see the smoke, and depending on which direction the wind was blowing and what speed it was blowing, we could actually watch it loop around the ballpark. And I'm sure many other of our season ticket members who are on this call experienced the same thing. You could just watch it and literally see it circle around and kick back out the right field at that 90-foot elevation, while the flags up top might have been blowing in a totally different direction.
Yep. All right, moving on to Donald H. and his question, which is, what portion of the Globe Life Field project did you enjoy the most, or that you found to be the most exciting?
Jack Hill taught me early in the project to not be excited until the day we walked through the door, for the first event. So, I would get excited about things, and Jack, we'd finish pouring concrete on a section of the concourse, and I'd say, God, this is awesome, Jack. And he'd just be like, back it down. You don't get excited until we're in the last day. What's been interesting in March, when everything came to the halt, we were sort of in mode for punch list work, which we are still. Actually, I've kidded people on some other industry calls in terms of sports facilities that I've done, and said we might be the first sports venue in the world to actually be finished by the time we open. Because these things tend to have a number of things that they have to get fixed, like building a house. You're always tweaking it and fine tuning it. So back in mid-March, a couple of things happened. So when the executive order from the county came down in terms of the stay at home, commercial and residential construction was exempt from that order. So we have been able to actually stay on the site this entire time. We being Manhattan Construction, our general contractor, a certain number of subcontractors that were doing punch list work. Our punch list started at about 15,000 items. So we are down now to literally yesterday, we sat and looked at it. It was about a page and a half. So we're not quite done yet. We were just about done. A lot of the final things we're doing now are related to Wi-Fi and DAS. I mean, we're tying in security cameras. When you have 600 cameras in a place, invariably one of them doesn't work. So you've got to go run traps and figure out where the issue is related to that. We did do some inspections this week on Monday and Tuesday with the city of Arlington as we are approaching our final certificate of occupancy. We have our TCO now. We hope possibly within the next week to 10 days to have our permanent CO, which would be great. And then now, our partners at Unisystems, who have commissioned the roof mechanization, are actually in town this week from Minnesota. Now that they were okay to travel a little bit further, so they are literally moving the roof every day now, testing it, getting it up to full speed. Up until this week, all of the roof movements that we've done had actually been done remotely from Minnesota. So the guys are on site now this week. And we've only done it up to about half speed to this point. So now they're in the process now of making sure that, our ramp downs that we need as the roof approaches full open or full close are working correctly. All the mechanization, the cameras that give us a view of what's happening up on the track when we're moving the roof, all that work's getting done now. And by the time they finish their commissioning work, we'll be able to move it at full speed, which we expect to be about 15 minutes to open or close.
Okay, so I think in your answer, you also answered a question from Michael W., who was curious about having the extra time, if you'd used it to shore up things, and you have. And then you also answered the question, and I get this too when I go out and talk about it, but people always want to know, how long does it take to open and close that thing? About 15 minutes. And that's probably close to industry standard for what you would see in some of these other ballparks, like the ballparks in Houston and Seattle and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. And interestingly, it's pretty much the Unisystems is the company name that they've done all these mechanizations. So yes, generally they're at about the same time, similar speeds. I will say wind is a factor. That's something we have to pay attention to too as operators, because if you do get into a situation, I believe in Houston, I believe it was sustained winds at more than 30 miles an hour, literally, the mechanization is not complicated. It's just, I think we got 600 horsepower of engines up there that are moving the roof. So, but if you hit certain wind thresholds, it's really tough for the roof to overcome it, because we're moving, 19,000 tons of steel. So, it's a 5.5 acre structure. Now it's a simple design. The technology is not that complicated, but wind resistance can be a factor. So, when we weigh things about roof open or closed, if we felt like we might have a threat of rain, if we had a front moving in where we might get sustained winds for a certain amount of time, we've got to be out in front of those things. So we'll always be paying attention to that, if we're in that situation with the roof open and a game going on.
Okay. Lance C has a question, and his question is, what new technologies will be rolled out in the new ballpark to enhance the fan experience?
Well, I think we're trying to make things as seamless as we can. It's been interesting now that the world has sort of changed here. We announced a bag policy previously, and we're sort of revisiting it now. I'm not quite sure where we're going to end up, but to mitigate touch for our staff and for guests, so that we're not touching a guest bag, and guests aren't putting the bag into the hands of into our security people for their own safety. We're going back and forth on that as to whether or not that's good practice. In terms of the ballpark, I think most of the technology stuff, we want to certainly have the Wi-Fi, the DAS to be seamless in terms of what fans can experience. I think on the food and beverage side now, we had a set of ideas and concepts that were in play, and now we're having to rethink those, to be honest. Although we do have a number of, touchless or keypad type locations where touch screens where you can go up and order your food without having to wait into a line, and then you just go to the stand to pick it up. So, it's almost like what you see at stores with the self-checkout. It's a touch screen. You go up, you do your transaction, you pay for it. You either get a code or a receipt with a number on it. You walk over to the stand that you chose to order from, and they'll provide you your food. So that's one of the big things I'm excited about is really sight lines. Baseball is still baseball. I think we still come here to watch the game. So we've talked a lot about how much closer this building and its seats are to the field, and to make the fan enjoyment, even more, bring people closer to the action and closer to the game. We've talked a lot about moving the services out, so that when you were walking around our main concourse, you can go 360 degrees and not lose sight of the field, which is a huge benefit for fans that we weren't able to enjoy at Globe Life Park, except, in the outfield areas. So if those seats behind home plate, but anywhere in the main concourse, then our upper concourse, probably 70% of the upper concourse has view back to the field too. So it's not just the premium seats or the seats down low that are getting to take advantage of that. The architecture in the building is beautiful. I'm excited about that. I want people to be able to see that and experience that, particularly those arches over in left field as an upper concourse experience. I think that's going to be fantastic. Our marketing team has been doing an amazing job with the branding. That is another one of those elements that we've been able to get. We're just about done with the interior branding. We want to add a couple of things on the outside we may not be able to get to before opening day, but they weren't part of the original project scope. So we're now as we've been able to get in and start to live in the building a little bit, we're looking around and saying, well, hey, we can improve that. Let's do that better than we had even thought. So, and like I said, it gets back to sort of, owning the home type thing where you're always fine tuning and tweaking. Parking, I think, is going to be a lot closer. We've got two lots three lots actually, with lot B, lot T, lot A, that literally are in the same footprint as the building. So from a fan amenity standpoint, you literally can pull up an A or B and park next to the building, or an A or T, and lot B is just a simple park your car and you walk across the plaza without having to cross the street, which was, we know before, you had to cross at least 6 lanes for four lanes at least on the Nolan Ryan side, no matter what direction you were coming from to get to the ballpark. Well, now you can get out of your car and literally you're on the footprint of the building. And even lot R to the south, that Cowboys Way for Rangers home game days will be closed. So it pretty much becomes a pedestrian access way from those 2,200 spaces there. So we've tried to do things and make them as convenient as we possibly can. Small things like, if you look at the canopies, they're at each entry. We try to provide those for shade, so that if we have a rain condition, or if we have a July or August hot day, we can get people into shade, which anybody who's ever come in the first base gate at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening on the west side of Globe Life Park knows, if you had to wait in line, how hot that could be. So we've tried to do a lot of things like that way, in a smart way, to better serve our fans and make ingress, egress a much better experience. So, again, I think proximity to the game and family restrooms, we talk about simple things. Mother's rooms. We have a sensory room for kids that, may have autism, may need a quiet space. We tried to think of all those things, incorporate those into this design that maybe we didn't have at Globe Life Park. So, I get asked a lot of, what's your favorite part of the ballpark? And for me, it's really hard to answer. I like all of it, but, and I think for fans, you have to come in and experience it. I think everybody's going to enjoy something different. But that's one of the beauties of it. Baseball is a game where it gives you the time and flexibility to get up and walk around. But because we have that view back now, you don't lose sight of what's happening on the field. And to me, that's critical. That's really important.
All right. And Rob, we have time for one more question. And that question comes from Frank P. And he says, now that the ballpark is built, is there anything that you would have changed or done differently?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. It's interesting because the building process, the design process actually started really, in late 2016, after the bond election here in Arlington in November. So, it's a fair question. I mean, and now that the world's changed a little bit here just the past 2 months, I mean, you could go back and start to rethink it all again, but I don't think so generally. I really don't think there's a lot we would have changed. There's always little things you look at and say, yeah, we could have done that a little bit better. And part of that is just, when you get into construction, I mean, it's not always a precise thing. You have to adjust many times into the field, but by and large, I think we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. Again, I know when our season ticket members and when all of our guests get in and start to experience it, they'll give us feedback and we'll adjust to that feedback. So, but no, I don't think there's anything that we really would have changed. I feel good about what we've accomplished as a team and can't wait to get people in.
No question about it. Rob Matwick, thanks so much for your time and for your thoughtful answers. We appreciate it. And I know that we'll have a chance to see you again sometime real soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks so much to Rob Matwick and Jon Daniels for participating in today's Lunch and Learn. Thanks also to Paige Farragut for giving us that beginning message. The Lunch and Learn series will continue. And so please watch for that. And we're glad that you've been able to spend an hour with us here during your lunch today. Everybody, stay safe and do what you can to help get us back to baseball as soon as possible. Thank you very much.